Okay, so first, we're very excited to have you here and talk because this book sounds awesome. I just got it last night, so I haven't started reading it yet, but it sounds like, yeah, exactly what our listeners would like.
Right up our alley, yeah.
Yes, right up our alley. I will say this podcast might be a little different than others where our listeners are already a little familiar with Manuel Noriega and like the School of Americas and the U.S. involvement in Panama, because we did a whole series on the Panama Canal on top of that. But for anyone listening for like the first time, maybe, who is Manuel Noriega? Like, how would you describe him?
Yeah, no, and thank you for saying that too. It's funny. I've been going on like a few podcasts to speak about this, and the vast majority of people either have no idea who he is, or the little that they do know is it's like a really construed view. It's like, you know, it's unfair. People they really vilify him and they put him in the same box as like a Pablo Escobar, when I like to sort of say that he was a lot more ideological than people would realize. It's not so much to do with with like the US invasion of Panama and whatnot. But to explain who Noriega was, Noriega in a sense was the most important intelligence asset for the United States government and the CIA for decades, starting in the mid-1950s, where he was essentially hand-selected from the military school that he attended in Peru, the Chorrillos military school, right up until 86, 87, when the Iran-Contra affair sort of spilled into public media. So Noriega was, he was the most important intelligence asset for the US for a long time. And then on top of that, he was the de facto leader of Panama between 1983 and 1989. And prior to that, he was like the right-hand man of the previous de facto leader of Panama, Omar Torrijos, from 1969 to 1981. So he was, domestically, undoubtedly super important to Panama and sort of where they are today, and especially where they came from after the coup of 1968. And then, as well as that, a friend of the United States, you could say.
Yes. And before starting to work on this book, how much did you know about any like Panama, Manuel Noriega? And I had no idea about his like right-hand man either. So this is all new, but like, how much did you know before you started to work on this?
Christina, I knew absolutely nothing. I'll be so honest. I was like, I really was blind going into it. When you start reading the book, and thank you so much for buying it, by the way. But when you start reading the book, you'll see that I'm really honest in my introduction, and I say that I knew nothing. I'd just written a book. So I used to live in Los Angeles, and while I was there, I met a former Crip, a former gang member from South Central Los Angeles, and I wrote what it was essentially a prison book where I interviewed a lot of Bloods and Crips and people who had committed murder and sort of atrocities. And a friend down in Panama, an American friend, he had heard about that book and essentially just said, would you like to meet all these people that have access to the story about the truth behind the rise, rule, and fall of Noriega? And I kind of knew who Noriega was just in passing, just because I'm like a little bit of a history nerd. But I knew nothing, I really knew nothing, and I flew down blind. I was sort of desperate for a really good story, and then when I got there, I immediately realized that I was like deeply embedded with what's left of the inner regime anyway, at least the people who were more so on Noriega's side than the people who sort of flipped and ended up testifying against him or working with the CIA directly.
Man, that's wild. And it's very interesting because we saw quotes about your other book, like you talking about it. We haven't like read it, but
I plan to. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it does sound very interesting. But you bring like a very, nuanced, different take than what other people bring to like when they think about criminals, or like, oh, that's all they see. But you bring like a different view to it where you're like, humanizing them in this system. And so it feels like you brought the same feeling to this book about Noriega's right-hand man.
Totally. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, because he in the eyes of the United States government, he's a criminal. I mean, he was convicted of 3 crimes in U.S. court, and he's not even an American citizen. Like, how crazy is that? Like, that's pretty nuts. If you really just look at it. So, yeah.
Also doesn't have to do with this book. It is very interesting who was recently pardoned by the U.S. for almost the same type of crimes Noriega was himself imprisoned for.
Yeah. It's very interesting. I don't really know much about that guy, and I'm sure because I look at keep track of your Instagram and what you guys talk about and everything that's happening in Venezuela right now. I see so many parallels to what happened in Panama in the 1980s. I mean, it's and this is just one case of many. So I'll say, unfortunately, it's like good timing for the book because it's such an in-your-face example of U.S. intervention in Latin America that like it's just like it's on the news 24/7. You know what I mean? It's hard to look away from. So I think that the similarities between what happened with Noriega in Panama in the 80s, particularly in 88 and 89, with the indictment and the drug smuggling, racketeering, money laundering charges or allegations against him, and then with Maduro right now, he's got this narco trafficker like planted on him and
accusation.
The accusation is planted on him, and he's got this $50 million bounty, that's what I was looking for, on his head. And the same thing happened with Noriega. So I think it's interesting at the very least.
Yeah, and really the book came out at, like, unfortunately, a perfect time. Although sometimes it feels like these things never end. It's always the perfect time for a book like this because it's always like one thing after the other.
And like, curiously, the U.S. is always doing this everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
But who is this right-hand man? I don't even think we were looking into the invasion of Panama and Manuel Noriega alone. So I don't even think we came across his name really. But who is he? How did he become involved with Manuel Noriega?
So yeah, you wouldn't really come across his name in a lot of places. You can find, you can see his name come up in various CIA documents that are made available online. You can find his name in like the New York Times, LA Times. And what he essentially was truly just a best friend to Noriega. So as much as he was his right-hand man, he was like a best friend. So Carlos's cousin married Noriega and they met at a family party in the 1960s. And Noriega was like 10 years older than Carlos, and he took Carlos under his wing in a lot of ways. So essentially Carlos was built by Noriega in a lot of ways. I don't like saying that because Carlos was a very independent man and he really did, like, that guy really shot from the hip. Like he was somebody who really went with his gut, but he was built by Noriega and he was taken under his wing. So they, as much as they worked together for, the CIA and the DEA and all that sort of cool espionage stuff, they really just were best friends at the end of the day. So Carlos was somebody who would have like given his life to Noriega. And I truly believe that in any way, shape or form. And I think that, and when you get to it, I don't want to spoil it, but at the very end of the book, Carlos recounts a story from the time of the US invasion of Panama. And I sensed a lot of regret that Carlos actually didn't give his life to Noriega. I sense that he actually wished that he had died to protect Noriega.
I'm sure.
Well, loyalty is really fierce, and yeah, as much as it was a job, it was sort of just like, it was almost like a vocation. It was almost like he was like meant to do it, or at least that's how he saw it.
Wow, and so we know Manuel Noriega went to this military school in Peru and the School of Americas. Did his right-hand man, Carlos, did he have the same kind of training too? I know you in your book, he did some stuff with like Mossad and the CIA, but did he have the same like background?
Not necessarily. So Noriega was a little bit older than Carlos, but he was also from a different area. I think Carlos would have grown up with more stability in his family. I believe Noriega's mother was a prostitute, and I don't know if his dad was in the picture. So Noriega was somebody who excelled despite his environment. Carlos was raised in an environment with love, and I know that for a fact. He grew up differently to Noriega, so there was a little bit of a different drive where I believe that Carlos was a little bit more, maybe, like as he grew a little bit older, I think he was a little bit more reckless, and I think Noriega was the one to tame him. I don't know if it was school that did that, because Carlos never spoke about, Carlos never went to like a military school, but he did join like the Panama National Guard, and then from there, like that sort of like leapt into him being chosen to go to Israel and have this training, and then to go to Washington DC and train with the DEA, like the newly formed DEA. He was like one of the first foreign agents or foreign assets for the DEA in the early 1970s. So a lot of it's timing, but he really was taken under Noriega's wing, and without Noriega, Carlos more than likely wouldn't have had access to sort of all these people and places.
Okay, I see. Because, yeah, he was the one with the connections. Because Noriega himself, he'd been like a long time person with the U.S. Like, I forgot how much we had talked about him in our original episode about Panama. But yeah, he was like doing work for the U.S., like infiltrating leftist youth organizations in Panama. And like, I think not even just Panama. I think like at
Like
least all of Central America.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, he he was like their most important guy for a really long time, for decades.
Until he wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah, until he said no, until he told the US no in I believe it was 1984, and then shit really hit the fan, and then the Iran Contra affair happened, and Noriega just like instantly became super vilified. He became like a mega scapegoat, and it was only a matter of time before they took him out.
Yeah, because he was killed during that invasion. And so then, obviously I haven't read the book, but just by what you said earlier, I think we can guess what then Carlos was not able to be around. Because, yeah, then he would have been.
Yeah,
I'm going to cut this out so it doesn't spoil your book, but I see now.
That's okay. Yeah, so Noriega didn't die during the invasion. He was
I was going to say no, because then he was extradited to the US.
Yeah, I'm forgetting. Yeah, he was caught.
But Carlos, the reason why, you can keep it in or keep it out, whatever you prefer, but the reason why Carlos wasn't in Panama during the invasion was because his son got into an accident at school in Switzerland. So like a week prior. So Carlos flew out to Switzerland with his wife at the time to be with his son, and while he was there, the invasion broke out, and Carlos was like an international criminal sort of at this time. He told me that Interpol had like a red notice out on him. So there was basically like a warrant.
How was he even able to go to Switzerland?
I know, right? But he got caught while he was in Europe. Like he got caught like while he was there.
Oh, okay.
They put him in cuffs, and he never made it back to Panama. But that's part of the reason why he really regrets it. He was, he basically was like, I wish I was there in the invasion, like, and I would have laid down my life. And all of Carlos's children told me sort of a similar story. They were like, if my dad was there during the invasion, like he would have been fighting them off with like a machine gun, and he would have gone down swinging, like it without a doubt. And they're basically like thankful for how things turned out, obviously, because they were like, my dad, like,
right.
didn't die during the invasion. He just got he basically got whisked away at the last second.
Man, yeah, and I'm sure like that would have been like the most honorable thing for him to do, and like in his own mind. But yeah, at least he, for whatever type of person he was, at least he got to live and like be with his family,
kids.
But yeah, grow old. Were you, when you were there, were you like living with him, or just like in close like proximity with him, or?
No, I was living with him directly for at least a couple months of it, and we sort of we had different locations for interviews, but we changed it up and diversified like the locations quite a bit, like from rural to urban, like where lots of people will be around for the interviews, or whether it was just Carlos and I. So it changed all the time, but I was there, my first time there, we went to like a rural beach house, and, we spent like a few weeks together, and it was supposed to be longer, but the country like broke out into civil unrest, and like the highways were blocked with protesters and like all this crazy stuff. So that like broke it up. And then after that, I sort of had to like come and go a few times. And sometimes when I came and stayed in Panama, I would stay in his apartment with like his, him and his girlfriend lived in this apartment in the city, and I would stay in like the guest room, and I was basically around him like 24/7. But I'm thankful for it, because I got to interview him like literally all the time. I got to see him at like every sort of time of day, and when he was super tired or super energetic, it's hard to like sort of fake things when you're under the microscope like that. And that's why he liked having me there all the time too, because he was like, I don't know if I can trust this guy yet. So I want to make sure, I want to basically like have him around all the time and see like what he does and what kind of guy he is. So it worked out for both of us, I think.
Yeah.
While you were there, I'm sure you talked obviously to a lot of people, not only him, but Was there like a general perception that of like people you spoke to, like how they, in hindsight, looking back, how they perceive now Noriega and his right hand man? Because I know from when we did the episode on the invasion, a lot of, well, some people that were interviewed for the Human Rights Report, they were like, hey, things were fine with Noriega, and now I don't have food, I don't have a job, I don't have a house. So I'm like, I'm wondering if things like are still like that.
It's something that I've tried to understand more, but I'll say this, I was just in Panama for the whole month of September, and while I was there, I met with a journalist from a newspaper called La Prensa, which have been around since like the early, I think probably in the 70s, but in the 1980s, Noriega like burnt down their headquarters 3 times. Like they were huge opposition in voice to Noriega. And one of their journalists told me that his family grew up in La Chorrera, which was a place that was bombed by the US during the invasion of Panama. It's like a really poor neighborhood. And he told me that his family...
was this... But this wasn't El Chorrillo?
Well, no, La Chorrera. It's just like little neighborhoods.
Okay, I'm wondering how close it is to this other place that we read about.
Oh, I'm sure it is, because they didn't bomb like a huge landmass, but
yeah, and it's not a very big country to begin with, so
no, definitely not. But anyway, his family like is from this really poor part of the city, and he said that when they even hear the name Noriega, or when people start telling stories, like they start crying. You know, they're really sort of traumatized by I guess like the regime and what happened in the 1980s. But as well as that, in my research for the book, I literally have human rights reports as like my sources in the book from the I forget what the agency is, but they're reports from the 1970s, actually from Omar Torrijos' regime, not from Noriega's. And they basically say that everything is fine, with the exception of the judicial system, which is flawed, because all like judges, ministers, they're all sort of appointed under military rule. There's no like due process, and a lot of those criminals are first of all, they have no representation, and they're also sent to prison without real trial. And then the prisons that they go to are like horrible. You know, there's one prison in Panama on Cuba Island, and it's like Alcatraz times 10. You know what I mean? It's like Alcatraz looks like Bali compared to Cuba Island. So it's something that I was trying to understand as much as possible, but a lot of people were doing well under the regime, for sure. And I think that especially under Torrijos, I guess the feeling that people had of like being almost like self-sufficient, like being like people felt more Panamanian than they ever did under the rule of Omar Torrijos. You know, they didn't feel like a proper state. Whereas under Noriega, the same feeling, to my knowledge, the same feeling existed, but it was a lot more apparent that you were living under like an authoritarian or under authoritarian rule, if that makes sense. So the two are really closely connected, because Noriega is an extension of Torrijos, but I just think that like maybe society was a little bit more strangled under Noriega, where under Torrijos he was a little bit more beloved. Kind of how like you can, and that's another comparison that I sometimes make between like Venezuela and Panama, because Hugo Chavez was pretty well liked by the people, right?
Right.
As Maduro is not. And it's because the society feels more strangled under Maduro than it did under Chavez. Whereas, it's the same thing if you sort of put it up together. But I do think that Noriega's regime was, not the right thing for Panama at the time. I can't endorse the guy by any means.
Yeah. But you can deliver some nuance into what the situation was, which is what this book does.
Absolutely. Yeah, it just provides a different narrative for a story that's been, I'll say maybe incorrectly told, or told with a bias for decades. Like I feel like people haven't really heard the other side of the story, which, I mean, in journalism, that's just exactly what you have to do. You can't just show one perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, because I made whenever we did our episode like a year or two ago, I already forgot, but I made a video just about the invasion of Panama alone, but like with details that maybe other people didn't know. And the comments were full of like, oh, but we went in there and we played I don't know, these songs, and that's how it ended. But it's like, okay, but people died. Like, please.
That's what I came across when I was doing the research too. It was like a bunch of articles like, woohoo, military power, and we played these rock songs to lure him out, and he finally gave up, and no mention of the hundreds of people that lost their lives and lost their homes, like so much suffering from the Panamanian people that was just ignored.
Yeah, there's an awesome documentary called The Panama Deception, and it's directed by this lady, Barbara Trent, who, she's still alive. I should have interviewed her when I had the chance, but she's hard to track down, I believe. But her documentary won Best Documentary at the Oscars in 1992. I think so, only like 2 years after the invasion of Panama. But anyway, in the documentary, she interviews people that were sort of civilians that were affected most. She doesn't really interview that many people in the military or politicians or anything like that. And, you know, it's kind of apparent that a lot more people died than were reported. You know, people, I think if you look it up, it's like, it'll say somewhere in the 300s that people died. But she makes the case that several thousand people died, like 3,000 people died. And she interviewed these civilians from this very poor neighborhood that, you know, swear on their lives that they saw, you know, American soldiers using like lasers, like testing weapons, that like literally lasers on civilians. Did you read that in your research? I mean, there's some really wacky shit that went on.
Yeah, I read that some figure in the U.S. when they were planning the invasion, that they basically said that they wanted to use it as a testing ground for new weapons.
Yeah.
So I think that makes sense.
The laser thing. Now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah, it's impossible for me to prove. I don't think Barbara was able to do it either, but it was all testimonials. It was basically all just people saying that they saw this happen. But, you know, aside from that, the sheer, I mean, just like the amount of artillery that the US had compared to, you know, what Panama, I think I interviewed a lot of, you know, US military guys while writing this book, just to hear about their perspective during the US invasion.
Right. You want to get like all the perspectives. I
just want to hear what they have to say. But these guys were like, one guy described the Panama Defense Forces, which is what the National Guard transformed into after Noriega assumed the throne in 1983. He described the Panama Defense Forces as mall cops. He said these guys are like mall cops compared to the US military. They just wiped the floor with them. You know what I mean? It was instantaneous. And in Noriega's memoir, which I'm not sure if either of you have had the chance to read, it's pretty interesting.
Actually, no, yeah.
Yeah, he has a memoir. I think it was written in the mid-1990s. This guy, Peter Eisner, was like the interviewer, and the whole thing is basically just transcripts, like questions and answers. But Noriega said in his memoir, and I guess like take it with a grain of salt, but he was like, they knew where my office was. They knew they could have just walked right in and slapped handcuffs on my wrists and taken me out of there, and not one Panamanian soldier would have stopped them, because that's true. I mean, the US military bases on the Panama Canal were like 3 miles from his office or something. Like, they could have gotten there in like 10 minutes, but instead they sent 27,000 troops to bomb the shit out of the city and to like scare people, to like really scare people. So really to scare Noriega. But like, it just, the whole thing is just like, so it's wacky, you know. There's a lot of stuff that just doesn't make sense, and yeah, the book can only answer so many questions. By the way, I didn't really put that many things in there that I couldn't prove. The documentation,
that makes sense.
It's really solid, but I didn't want to just write things that I guess I couldn't prove or I couldn't corroborate. So yeah, but it's all really interesting. I would highly recommend that documentary.
Yes. What was it called?
I looked it up. It's on Netflix. The Panama Deception.
It's on Netflix. Okay.
It's on YouTube for free. I think that's where I watched it.
Oh, even perfect. Yeah. Okay.
I honestly would believe that too, because when I was reading the human rights report that I used for my research, there was a lot of Panamanians that were interviewed, and they kind of said the same thing. Like, they could have just gone to him and got him. Like, they didn't need to come to our poor neighborhood and bomb us and attack us. They said a lot of the same things.
There was no need.
I would believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, with the involvement of that the U.S. already had, like Noriega and whatever regime is in charge aside, the U.S. is always they always have had a hand in Panama. I think that even like currently now with like the third, I don't know what they're calling it, the official name, but like sending people, deporting them to other places that are not where they're from.
Right.
They're using a jail in Panama right now for that as well.
No.
That they didn't even really need permission to do so. They just did it because like the U.S. is so involved with Panama. So I'm sure that they 100% would have known where he would have been anyway. Like, so that's.
They knew. And then, I mean, when the troops sort of hit the ground, Noriega scrambled. He sort of realized his life was in danger, and he can say what he wants. He still picked up a machine gun and like fought against the soldiers. He didn't exactly go out with plans.
He wasn't going to go willingly either.
No, he wasn't. No. Yeah.
He's also an expert, a trained liar, like expert spy. When he was interviewed by Peter Eisner for that book, like he had an agenda. So it's really interesting comparing it to Carlos's story, which is what I have, and then to everything else that's available. I mean, there's not a lot out there, but the stuff that is out there, there's some really good stuff that people were, I guess, like reporting on actively during that time. There's a guy called Richard Koster who wrote a really good book called In the Time of Tyrants, and he's an American dude, but he's lived in Panama.
Write that down too.
Yeah, he's an American dude.
In the Time of Tyrants.
Lived in Panama since, I think, the 1950s. He arrived there as a U.S. soldier. I think he sort of fell in love with the place, became a journalist, like an English journalist in Panama, working for American newspapers. And then he just stuck around. And when the regime started, he was heavily opposed. And he was like one of the few people that wrote against the de facto leaders, the dictators. And really impressive guy. But he wrote the book, I think he released it like in 1990 or 1991, like a year after the invasion. Pretty ballsy, if you ask me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd highly recommend that too. It's like, it's great. But it's huge. It's like 400 or 500 pages or something.
Dang.
Okay, adding that to the TBR.
Yeah.
And yeah, of course, we don't want to come across like we're like defending Noriega. Like, of course, it was a brutal dictatorship. But I think it's important to tell the story and come from an angle of criticism, I guess, from the U.S. instead of making it all like from the point of view of, oh, the U.S. is liberating these countries from oppression, because that's a story that gets sold from the U.S. like worldwide.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. At the end of the day, it's U.S. intervention in Latin American politics. It's proxy governments. You're meddling with politicians to sort of achieve an outcome that benefits the U.S. more than it does the local people. So it's a problem that obviously it still happens today all over Latin America, all over the world, you could say. But especially in Latin America, I would argue, just because of the proximity, it just seems to happen everywhere.
Yeah, the U.S. has always had a very, very important interest in Latin America. And we could see that all the way back from, I don't even know, the beginning, with the Monroe Doctrine and
the Monroe Doctrine,
all that stuff. So
yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. That's when it all went wrong. The downfall.
Yeah. The beginning, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, before we go, where can people buy your book and then follow you for more information? Also, I guess before that, anything you want to say to I don't know, I'm sure our listeners would already be interested in buying the book, but if they weren't, what is your one-liner to convince them you need to read this book?
I would say that although the book tells essentially what is essentially a story from a bygone era, which is the Cold War in Latin America, the themes and the topic itself is completely cyclical. And everything that happened in the book, I would argue, is happening right now in real time, and we're only going to realize that in a few decades to come. So, I know that was maybe more than one sentence.
No, but it was perfect.
Yeah, I'd highly
I think
recommend
like in
it.
15 years, you can write this book about Bukele.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
It's a history book that's timely.
And then, where can people follow you, your work, and then find your book?
You can follow me just on Instagram at Dunn.Cillian, so DUNNE.CILLIAN. And then you can get the book on Amazon. It's probably easiest for most people. And if anybody that's listening like owns a bookstore, works for a bookstore or a library or anything like that, it's available for wholesale on Ingram Spark. So it's available for like mass distribution and stuff like that too. But Amazon is totally the easiest if you're just buying one copy.
Perfect. And thank you so much for taking the time to come on and reaching out to us to even come on. Because otherwise I would have like missed the this book completely, really.
Yeah, no, that's what most people will. So that's why I gotta do this and get the word out there. But I appreciate you guys so much for having me on. I really love what you do. I think you and very few other people on social media are sort of talking about this, and it's like so apparent, like it's on the news every day, and I'm surprised more people are sort of like having this sort of discourse. So thank you guys for doing that too.
Yes, thank you.